Okay, so I went to the movies for the first time in a long time, actually, and I was gonna go see Jackass 3, and I got to the window and I just couldn't do it. I really couldn't put money down for that one, no. And compounded with the fact I didn't want to see it in 3D at all. Yeah, so I saw Let Me In, and I've been meaning to see that one for a long time, and so I finally got to see it. I liked it. I liked it a lot, and I guess it makes sense because I saw the Swedish version, Let the Right One In, and I really like that one as well. So I'm not sure how to describe this one. It's hard. I know the controversy is going to come down on this one, especially for fans of the original. Film snobs like me. I'm a little surprised the reception's been as good as it has, because in many ways you could argue this remake is entirely unnecessary. And so I think that's the real problem here, is they're both very good. And so one has to ask the question, did we really need an American remake of this film? I think so. Honestly, yeah, I think we did, because there's still a really long-standing controversy as to the quality of the subtitling for Let the Right One In. If you actually look it up, you'll see that there's really key and really striking and really unforgivable differences between the original intent of the subtitles and what really made it onto the DVD and or Blu-ray. There's tons of differences, and it's really hard to get together in your mind. If when you can't get a good translation, it's hard to appreciate the film for what it was. And I saw the film with the quote-unquote bad subtitles, and I still really liked it. So, if I may indulge in a little bit of blasphemy here, I actually prefer the American version to the original Swedish version. And don't get me wrong, I actually enjoy almost all the time the originals over the remakes. You know, I'm one of those guys who really doesn't see much point in remaking films. But there are some cases when it works out really well. And this is one of them. The other version, I remember, if you ever saw the movie The Ring, I really like the American version over the original Japanese version. And in both cases, for Let Me In and The Ring, for pretty much the exact same reason. Mainly production value. And that sounds like a really cold thing to say when you're talking about a movie that, oh, I like this better because the production value is better. But I think in this case, it really is true. I think the direction, the cinematography, the score, pretty much every technical element, you know, up to and including the directing, is better in this version. And it actually, I think, tells the story in a better way. There's a lot of subtlety to Let Me In. A lot of layers to the narrative, which, again, when you're a snob like me, you get to talk about layers and layers of symbolism and all that cool stuff. And I think it comes through much clearer, partially because it is in English, and I think a lot of the nuance of the acting performances, when you're not reading, I hate to be the guy, when you're not reading subtitles and paying attention to the performances, a lot of nuance gets through. And I think especially just because the actors are speaking English, a lot of the nuance of the emotion and the performances really does carry through in the American version. I know a lot of people will disagree with me because they're just like, well, just pay attention to the fucking movie. You know what I'm saying. And if I may go to The Ring, the reason I prefer the American version of The Ring is pretty much entirely because I think the video, the death video in The Ring is scarier. It's really much more well made, I think. And again, people will disagree with me on that one, but that's fine. You know, I'm not trying to take away the original from you. By all means, watch the original, sir, and enjoy. I really like the way the original video was shot. But Let Me In. There are some things in that movie that really wowed me, that genuinely surprised me. For instance, things that I thought were better in the American version than the Swedish version. I thought the murder scenes were more graphic, and that's not always a good thing, but I think in this case, the act of taking a human life, the weariness that the older man feels, the whole the really grinding fatigue on this guy, as he starts to realize what he does. But the fact that it's become kind of a routine for him, the fact that the spell that Abby has woven over him is still very much there, but when he has to, be stashing bodies, you can kind of see it's become a job for him. It's not really a labor of love anymore. And so I thought the graphicness and you got to be really up close as you saw him harvesting these people for blood. I thought that was it was really effective and visceral, and I thought that helped to give the deaths gravity. I hope that makes sense. I really like the soundtrack. The soundtrack is one of those, when you're an 80s nerd like me, because I love 80s music, it really does, it's set in 1983. It really does make use of some of my favorite songs of the era. It's got Let's Dance, it's got one of my favorite songs, the breakup song. And if you, I won't sing it for you, but if you look up the breakup song, it's one of my favorites of all time. I will never get tired of that film. Pardon me. And there's one scene in particular that really stole the show for me, and that's a scene where you're following the guy as he's trying to collect food, and he has this routine where he hides in the other person's car, and he kind of ambushes them in the car, which, if you ask me, was not really an ideal way of killing people, especially if they just look back through, but whatever. There's a scene where it goes bad, that he gets seen, and so he tries to get away, and there's a scene where he tries to get away in the car, and the car has a wreck. And you see this entire thing from the moment he's discovered to the point where there's this really horrendous wreck. You see this all from the point of view of being inside the car, where the car it gets hit by the fucking truck, and it rolls, and like people are getting maimed, it's awful, and it's like, I have no idea how they did that. Short of actually wrecking a car, but Jesus Christ, that's amazing how I really want to know how they did that, because that was an amazing and gripping scene. Really great stuff. And so it's rare that I can watch a movie and look at that and go, I have no fucking clue how they did that. Like, none. Because that I would guess that was a practical effect, but I don't know. It's stuff like that when there's effects in a movie that aren't obviously like entirely CGI. And there were some moments like that in the movie that actually kind of did take it away for me. The vampiric movements when she's actually like preying on people are kind of artificially sped up. Probably could have been done a little better. On the other hand, I don't know what they could have done. It looks a little fakey when she's kind of... It almost looks like, how in the original Spider-Man kind of looked fakey and weightless when he was kind of flipping around on buildings, and it kind of looked like Yoda when Yoda was kind of doing somersaults. It was very fakey in that regard. And so, honestly, if there was a downside, it actually was the effects aside from the wreck. Now, if you haven't seen Let the Right One In, it's virtually the same story, of course. And from a storytelling standpoint, you will almost never hear me say this, but this is a fantastic vampire movie. And I think, honestly, this is going to get lost in the morass of vampiric romance movies that you see out there, namely Twilight. Twilight kind of ruined the entire genre for everybody. It's not fair to say that it's kind of a vampire romance movie, because it's not. Mainly for the sole reason that these characters are 12, and so they're not really at any kind of point of sexual maturity, and so it's not really about that. It kind of is, because at that age, the people are starting to discover, especially young boys are starting to discover that, but what it's really about is... It's really a story about it's a horror story. It's a very frightening story when you stop to think about it. Like, when you watch the movie and you watch it all the way to the ending, it ends on a very sweet and uplifting note. And you honestly will probably leave the theater if you're not aware of the storyline at all. you'll probably leave the theater going, that was really sweet. That was charming. I feel good for those two. I hope they do well. And then, if you stop and think about it, you feel horrible. Because this is a horrible story. Like not in terms of like horrible in quality, but this is a nightmarish, depraved story. What happens to Owen in this movie has ruined him. He's like, when you stop and think about what he's become, what Abby is, it's really frightening, because this story is really about how this kid has been just systematically and masterfully manipulated by an animal. And so that's what you really have to realize from the beginning of this movie, is that Abby the vampire is a cold, calculating, super intelligent animal. And so pretty much everything you see in this movie that you might consider to be sweet or romantic or touching, you always have to keep it in the back of your mind that this, in every step of this story, it's a cold, calculating measure to basically, so she can replace the old man who's not doing his job anymore, who's actually not in his physical prime anymore, who is, let's face it, unappealing to her now, who is not adequately feeding her, who is not being an adequate guardian or keeper or whatever you want to call it. You pretty much realize early on that she has systematically used and just wasted this guy to the point of uselessness. And as soon as she realizes this, she starts acting all sweet and charming and trying to basically win over this kid, breeding him as a replacement. And so, like, even when she comes back and saves him from bullies, that was a calculated move. It was all in an effort to make it seem like she cared about him, just so he would basically devote his life to her, because he owed her his life. And so, from the beginning, this was all like a master plan to basically breed him as a replacement, to make him into a killer. And so when you stop and think about that, I was like, that really is a frightening story. And so, again, if I may indulge in a little bit of snobbery here, when I actually heard a bunch of people say, like, that was a really sweet story, I was like, are you kidding me? That was fucking horrible. Like, so it really is a more effective horror story than anything that passes itself off as a horror story, just in terms of, like, people think horror stories are like, Jason Voorhees, where there's like a physical threat of, somebody breaking into your house and killing you. I guess that's a type of horror, but this type of horror was even more frightening, just because it's the systematic psychological destruction of a human being, and that person doesn't even know it. So it's basically the creation of a complete and utter sociopath, complete mass murderer who is just mentally enslaved to this beast, and who will never even realize it. Who is so. You can see it's like this cycle is repeating. And so I think this movie, actually much better than the first one even, managed to really hammer home the fact that this is a cycle that keeps going and has been going on who knows how long. Because, like, you see him pick up a really old set of photos where he sees the old guy as a young guy with her, looking the exact same age, and it doesn't get through to him, where it's like he doesn't see that in his future, and that is his future, 40 years from now, 60 years from now, that's going to be him. And so I thought that was a really good, really frightening story, and a rare one. I have not read the novel. Actually, I would like to read the novel, because I understand there's a lot of elements that are left out, especially considering the character of Ellie or Abby, or whatever you want to call her. Especially considering her true nature, as it were, and that's actually hinted at in the Swedish version. As to, I'll just say her true nature. You know what I mean? If you've seen the Swedish version, you know. And so I don't think it adds a whole lot to the story, although it does give her a lot more depth of character, which is left out in the American version. If you know the scene I'm talking about, you know. Is it vital to the story? No. I do kind of wish they left it in there. But anyway, I'll just close with saying I thought the acting performances were pretty spot on. Really great. I think Chloe Grace Moretz, I think her name is, you may remember her as Hit Girl from Kick-Ass. You can really tell after Kick-Ass and this movie, she has a phenomenal career ahead of her. She is an amazing actress, and she's not even hit her stride yet. You know what I'm saying? It's actually kind of scary to consider what she's capable of when she really does perfect her craft. You know what I'm saying? She is a revelation in this movie. The kid, the male kid, Owen, does also a very good job. That hair, though, he is cursed in this movie with a tremendously bad hairdo. But if you needed that extra nudge to go see a really scary movie, I would definitely go see Let Me In, because if you haven't seen either version, you really owe it to yourself, because it really is one of the best movies, the best vampire movies, and one of the best horror movies that you'll probably ever see. Really liked it. And besides that, I am a huge whore for Elias Koteas, who plays the cop. I like pretty much every performance he's ever done. You gotta love the guy. And yeah, I even liked him in The Fourth Kind, which is just about the only good thing you can say for that movie. Elias Koteas is the man. So, and if you don't know him, look him up, because he's really awesome. Anyway, I started off on a good note, and now I have to go sit down and talk about TNA Impact. So my good mood is about to be ruined. Until then, my friends, I will be back in a very short while with a new review, because I just finished shooting it today. Let Me In was my sanity break, and now I go back into insanity with TNA. So have a good one, and have a good time at the movies.